What if I was to tell you that suffering doesn't exist? You'd probably think I'm full of BS, right? But today I want to explain to you why not only is that an accurate statement, but it's actually our true nature when we understand the ultimate reality of existence. In Eastern philosophy and spirituality, suffering is often thought of as an illusion, particularly within Advaita Vedanta, Taoism, and also the practice of Dzogchen in Vajrayana Buddhism. And so when a lot of people hear that suffering is an illusion, a lot of people just think it's utter BS. But you got to hear me out today, and I'll explain to you why, in truth, suffering actually doesn't exist. First of all, who is it that suffers, right? So it is our persona, our jiva in Sanskrit, which is the persona system, our ego, that suffers. And so from that perspective, we can say that there's physical suffering and mental suffering. But often in the Eastern spiritual traditions, we're often talking about more of the mental side, this state of psychology that we live in, and also the ultimate consciousness. The body is what it is, right? The body does what it does. And the body eventually declines and ultimately will go back to the earth and will be food for worms. And so we all know that about the body. But why do we inherently suffer as this jiva, is what the East is talking about. Why do we suffer like that? Obviously, as I said, we do suffer in the physical world sometimes when we have an illness and this and that. But even the physical body doesn't even make an enlightened master suffer when they understand the ultimate reality, when they understand that they actually aren't the jiva. And so all of us who live as a jiva, right, we have this jiva, this persona, this ego, this thing that is entangled with everything in the world. And so as we continually live, the more things that are taken away from us, the more we suffer, because we identify from this jiva, which is a byproduct of actually duality. It's not a byproduct of non-duality, of the ultimate reality of Brahman. And so we have this undifferentiated consciousness within all of us, which is Atman. Now, the Atman is identical with the Brahman, the ultimate reality. And that's actually who we truly are. The problem is we identify with the jiva, with this ego that we've become. Now, this jiva is only an accumulative self, right? It's everything that you've learned from the world. And the world has told you who you are. So I am Australian, my name is Jason, on and on it goes, right? And so the world says that I need to operate from this type of conditioning. And that's how we've all been trained. We've all been trained to be this jiva. And so the enlightened masters are the ones who have realized that they're actually not this jiva. They're not Jason. They're not Australian. Ultimately, they're the Atman. But we need to understand that our jiva is so entangled in the world. And because it's entangled, it eclipses the Atman. So we don't see it within ourselves, right? A lot of people only really recognize the Atman when you take them out of their familiar environment and you put them in a completely different environment. Now, that often frightens them because everything is new and nothing operates as it does in your particular comfort zone. And so when you take them out of that environment, it forces them to be humble, which then downregulates their ordinary jiva so that they can start to see the world more from the ultimate perspective. And I've noticed this take place when I've had retreats and had tours and that, as particularly in India, where you take Westerners out of their familiar environment and you place them in India, which is completely different. It humbles people, even the most hardened hearts. And so then they start to see reality in a different way. And actually, that's how we learn a lot from that place as well. We learn more about who we truly are and the nature of the world around us. And so the masters themselves are practicing a sparsha yoga a lot of the time, which is no association, no contact, and essentially no relationship. Sparsha means relationship. Asparsha means no relationship. So because they abide in the Atman, they are making no contact with the world around them. Mentally, I mean here too. They're not allowing their jiva to get entangled with the world, which then ultimately makes them believe that they suffer on the jiva level. And let's be clear, the jiva does suffer. When we believe we are the jiva, from that perspective, there is suffering. But the fact is, the jiva is an illusion. So then our suffering is an illusion. When we operate from the Atman, there is no suffering because you are ultimately Brahman. You are the one undifferentiated consciousness. And that's truly who we all are. And so from that place, if you abide in that place, even if physical suffering comes along, it doesn't affect you because you are no longer identified with this jiva that thinks it's the body, thinks it's the mind, thinks it's related to everything around it. You've come back into the heart of existence. And from the heart of existence, there is no suffering. And so we need to understand that. We need to understand that this jiva we've become suffers because we believe in this illusion of duality. The jiva is a byproduct of duality. And so when you believe in this illusion of duality, you are going to suffer. That is just a matter of a fact. And if any of you have spent any time around a master and they're always joyful and happy and not concerned about a lot of things, it's because they abide in the Atman. They know that oneness is the ultimate reality. And the essence of that ultimate reality is ananda, is unassociated bliss. So see, you find here, particularly with Asparsha Yoga and Ananda, you find this lack of association, right? So bliss arises from no association. It's not associated with anything. You're not ultimately blissful because your football team won, for example. The ultimate bliss comes from the abidance in the Atman. That's where the ultimate bliss comes from. And so that's the essence of Brahman, Ananda, that unassociated bliss. And that is why in the Upanishads they say Sat Chit Ananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. That's the nature of existence itself. And that's all we are. Suffering is just a mirage, an illusion that arises within the jiva. And we think that we suffer. And then we make all sorts of justifications why we suffer, particularly when we are going through really tough times. We make all sorts of excuses why we suffer. But from the ultimate knowledge of Advaita Vedanta and Taoism and Dzogchen, that suffering doesn't exist. And you need to stop making excuses for yourself, and air quotes, your jiva, and just realize that that jiva, that suffering, is an illusion itself. But you need to have keen discernment, viveka, and you need to practice vairagya, dispassion, to completely abide in that. Because if you have those two tenets and you practice those, then you'll start to pull apart. And so you'll see that the jiva starts to disappear in front of your eyes. Not even with any effort, but because you're just practicing two things, viveka and vairagya. You're just essentially having discernment within your mind. You're starting to notice how your jiva operates and it gets entangled within reality, and you're just pulling back on worldliness, vairagya. And so then you start to experience this ananda, this ultimate bliss. And that's what we truly are, that ananda, that bliss, not the constant suffering that we believe we are. Even the Buddha understood that ultimately suffering doesn't exist. He did say that life is suffering from a particular level of existence, but then we have the Eightfold Noble Path to disentangle ourselves from this illusion of ego that we think we are that ultimately suffers. So all in all, the truth is that we actually don't suffer in reality. It's only an illusion and a mirage. And from that place, we make other people suffer. And so when we believe that we suffer, we start to make other people suffer, because ultimately hurt people hurt people. And that's not even rocket science. It's just something that we all start to recognize when we live more and we start to see how others treat each other. But when we start to recognize that that jiva is just out there suffering and trying to make others suffer, then we recognize that our ultimate and true nature is Atman. So, as I said, the truth is we do not suffer. The ultimate fact of reality is that you truly are the Brahman. And from that place, the essence of the ultimate nature is bliss itself, unassociated ananda. Shanti, shanti, shanti.
you.